They might talk about humor, music, film, books, football and box sets, exercise and maybe even food, trivia and sport, politics and health, sometimes well-being too. On the Life with Brian. On the Life with Brian.
Coming up on Life with Brian.
It's always more heartbreaking when someone you worship as a footballer goes wrong like that.
Luckily, Brian hasn't done that to me.
It's really difficult to write jokes about a Prime Minister when you're not guaranteed the next day that Prime Minister is still going to be the Prime Minister.
Keegan fills Schmeichel's gap with semen. Hello, it's good to have you here for episode 44 of Life with Brian, the Brian McClare podcast, which is, of course, hosted semi-professionally by former Manchester United and Celtic player Brian McClare. And he's somewhat ably assisted by myself, Mark, and my co-host, Matthew. How are you both?
Good, thank you. Good to see you.
And Brian, have you been up to anything exciting since we last caught up?
I don't know if it's exciting or not. Other people were particularly excited about it. I find it a bit disturbing that I somehow managed to get to 60.
Yeah, well, it was, you couldn't keep it quiet. It was all over social media, mostly thanks to us. But I saw...
Oh, yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that's
I saw Celtic sent you a nice little tribute on Instagram. So, obviously...
I didn't look on social media. I didn't have time. Too busy.
Well, take my word for it.
You can show me them all next time I see you. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't want to embarrass you publicly, but we had a few pre-birthday drinks, didn't we, Brian, down in South Liverpool a couple of weeks ago in the glorious town of Garston, or suburb of Garston. And,
with a nice little wander around there. Yeah.
Yeah, went to all the Docker pubs. Brian got mobbed by all the Evertonians.
You don't think you're... Well, I'm unrecognisable now, Kevin, so it's very strange to get recognised in Liverpool, but it was a one Manchester United fan in that particular part of of Liverpool, but we had a right good time with them, so hospitable and very, very amusing.
It was good fun.
I'll have to say I was very impressed with the complete lack of emotional response from your two co-hosts when you mentioned that you were 60. Nothing.
He's been milking it for the last month. I'm sick of hearing about it.
It was like Mount Rushmore. I thought my screen had frozen. Happy birthday! It's I'm slightly ahead of you, Bryce. It's a bit odd having a 6 in your age, isn't it?
I'm just looking at the balloons this morning and thinking, how did I get to 60? And I know you're slightly older, Kevin, but I still feel 17, and certainly not physically, but in my head,
Yeah.
Well, and you've heard from him already, but joining us this time is a comedian, writer and presenter who devotes most of his time to comedy and football. So it's quite fitting then that he supports Crystal Palace. Welcome to the show, Kevin Day. How are you, Kevin?
I'm very well. You spent a long time on that intro, didn't you?
You forgot author.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yeah, I'm ashamed. Go back and read
it. Don't worry, we'll get plugs in for the book later, don't worry.
But the author, because you've always wanted to write a book.
It's true. You'll appreciate this, Brian. My dad taught me to read at the age of 4 because, he said, and this is a quote, it will come in handy, but B, my dad was a good, God rest his soul, was a proper trade unionist, and he believed that the only way you could communicate with the boss classes was by speaking the same language as them. So he always had this idea that working class people needed to read and write properly. And I've been obsessed with reading since the age of 4. And I grew up with that imposter syndrome that many of us had. It never occurred to me that I'd ever be able to write a book. So the fact that I've now written a second one is a source of great pride to me, Brian, I have to say.
I think it should be as well. It's like you just said, they're very similar sense of background. As that me, it was drummed into me about education, study hard at school, and that will give you the opportunity to get out in the big wide world. Yeah. But I didn't particularly go that wasn't where I ended up going round the world with, but because something else I became obsessed with, as you are obsessed. What I've particularly enjoyed with doing research about you is clearly you've loved football, you love Crystal Palace, but you love football fans.
I do, and I always warn people, if you're going to research me just on Wikipedia, you need to ignore a lot of that, because a lot of that information comes from a strange little gnome stalker that I have, who has not quite a proper grasp on what I've done about. I do. Do you know what? I'm never happier, but I'm really lucky that my wife understands this. That I'm never happier than when I'm in the same pub, talking the same bollocks to the same people that I've been speaking to for 30 or 40 years. I love Palace fans in particular, but I love football fans in general. I still get cross these days that people think two things. They think, first of all, if you're a football fan, you're incapable of having any other area of knowledge or expertise. They think if you're a football fan, then you're not interested in the theatre, you're not interested in politics, you're not interested in dance, literature, all of which is nonsense. And still there are people who don't know about football who, if you said to them, come to my pub before a football game, it'd be too rough, it'd be too scary. But yeah, the pub we drink in, it's a little local Thornton Heath, old-fashioned boozer. And yeah, there's builders in there, there's cabbies, but there's also lawyers, there's accountants, there's people from all over South London who just happen to be united in their love of Crystal Palace Football Club. And it's my happy place, that pub. Before a game, after a game, it's the place I feel more relaxed and more comfortable than anywhere else in the world, to be perfectly honest. And unless people understand football, they just look at you baffled when you say that to them. They just don't get it. I dread going to weddings in case I'm sat at a table with people who don't like football, because what have you got to talk about otherwise? It's just like, but I understand if you don't get the concept, and it's the same with, I've met a lot of sportsmen, Brian, I'm sure it's the same with you, who they get into punditry, they get into panel shows, because nothing will ever replace in their life the camaraderie of the dressing room. And unless you've been part of that dressing room camaraderie, you can't really explain to people how much you miss it. And that's the same for me. If you said to me, I could never go on stage again, I'd be very unhappy. I'd be really unhappy. If you said to me, you'll never be able to go to the Parsons Arms again before a Palace game, I don't think I'd be able to cope with that, Brian. And it's a strange thing for a middle-aged man to admit, but it's been the baseline of my life for as long as I can remember.
Well, I can empathise with that, certainly in recent terms. I mean, because I've played football and I've been involved in football for such a long time, and it's only particularly recently that I've had the opportunity to be a proper football fan again.
Yeah.
So I do the same thing. I go and watch Glasgow Celtic. I go to a pub in the East End of Glasgow that most people would have a look at and walk straight past. And I go in there and I have to accept that when I go in there, even though I'm unrecognisable, people seem to recognise me, and they want to talk about football in particular.
Yeah.
Particularly, they want to talk about Celtic, and they want to have a picture taken. I don't have any issues with that kind of thing. I'm sure it may happen to you on occasion when you go into your local, and I really enjoy that. And this is part of the thing. This is the first thing I'm thinking about is, get to Glasgow, walk to the pub, go in, say hello to the people who run it, love smashing people, and just see what transpires over that next couple of an hour or so, have a couple of pints, and then walk from there to the game. And for me, it's so much fun, you know, and the game itself can win, lose, or draws, and it's an experience, you know.
We've reached that stage where the game is the least important part of the process for us. I mean, the game has changed out of all recognition from when we first started going, and a lot of the people I'm with are the people I've been with for 45, 50 years, and the game itself has changed, but it's the before and after that's see. What I'm interested though, Brian, if you don't mind, as I know Matthew wants to come in there, but you're part of so many people's memories. But when people come up to you and they talk to you about a particular goal or a particular game, do you often share that memory? Do you have the same sharp, clear recognition that they do for a particular goal?
For different reasons, sometimes. A lot of the times, people will remind me of things. I mean, we did this a few months ago. Matthew was talking about Manchester United and Liverpool, and they said, yeah, you scored 3 goals against Liverpool. And I couldn't remember at all anything about it, not the game, not the occasion. And I had to go and look it up to see what they wasn't taking the piss. You know?
Only one you couldn't remember. You could remember the other 2.
That's I'm saying that one of them. But more than often, when you go to particular, it's usually about 1 or 2 little events, irrespective of which particular football fans. When I'm in Glasgow, a lot of it's to do with the game in 1986. Where Celtic had to win by at least 3 goals in the last game of the season to win the Premier League, or to have a chance to win the Premier League. And Hearts of Midlothian were away at Dundee that day, and they only needed a draw. And everybody will talk about that particular game and say they were there, you know, and there was only 15,000 at that particular game, but there's so many people who say, and that's part of that. Makes you always remember something special like that. And a lot of the times it's cup finals or different things. One of the things I have found is that as time has passed, you forget the bad times you had, you know, because what was I watching the other day? I was watching a game yesterday. It was just on. I wasn't watching. It was a game, the highlights from the Germany game, and somebody hit the ball over the bar. They should have scored from 6 or 7 yards. And a little memory popped back into my head that I'd missed like that, but from even closer. At Celtic Park in a midweek game against Hearts, funnily enough. You could not have done this if you'd tried. You know, if you'd given you 99 times out of 100, you'd have scored. The ball came to you straight in front of goals and you hit it over the bar. So they forget those things, and I seem to have become a lot better player than I remember myself. So I'm quite happy to. And then the thing as well, though, you're saying that you're talking about the football, and people are talking about football. That's what people want to talk about mostly. And I accept it. I like talking about football. You know, people sometimes will say, well, I'm sorry, I might be boring you here. I say, no, look, if you love football, there's so many things to talk about with regards to the football.
Well, I was going to say there, Brian, and it kind of relates to the same question. I was going to say, do you appreciate fan culture more now that you've stopped playing? I mean, that day we had out in Garston, you know, having a laugh with those Everton fans and the Liverpool fans, and you know, you wouldn't have been able to do that when you were playing. And
no, but it's one of the things I've always liked to do. I mean, there's no kind of pub culture in my family in the sense that my dad never went to the pub. My mum didn't go to the pub. So when I was old enough, I wasn't even old enough. I went to the pub before you were supposed to be old enough. I really enjoyed going to the pub, not going to get pissed. They enjoyed being in pubs, and I've always liked going to pubs like we went to in Gasson, where you've got like seeing those 2 people who were saying the guy shouts over, that he's a shit welder, you know. So it's that part of the thing. It was like, you know, a little bit. They're not quite sure whether it's me or not. And they're shouting my name from across the pub. You know, I'm not deaf. You know, like, why don't you just come over and say something? You know, and I really enjoy that seeing people enjoying themselves. I think that's what it is, being part. And I love watching people. That's my favourite thing.
I had a chap come up to me a couple of weeks ago in the pub before a game and said, I remember going to see your show one time when I was really down and I was having all sorts of troubles, and you did this particular routine. I went, oh, that's great to hear. And he started talking about the routine, and I realised after 2 minutes it wasn't my routine. It was Mark Thomas's. So I thought, but he was so passionate about how much this routine had changed his life. So I just took the credit for it. So in the end, that's all you can do, basically.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Talking of, let's talk about football. Kevin, you're our second comedian and Palace fan we've had on after your great friend Mark Steele, who we send our very best wishes to with his current fight against cancer.
Yep.
Do you think following a less successful football team, shall we say, helps build a character for a stand-up comedian?
I think that's interesting. I love Steely. I love watching Steely at football because Steely's always saying, I don't understand. I just want to keep a low profile. I just want to go to the game. I just want to keep to, in that case, Steely, don't wear a pink fedora. that might help keep you low profile. I think it's really interesting. I don't know. There are a lot of Palace fans who are comedians. I don't know if it gives you a particular outlook on life, because what you have to remember is that I moan about being mid-table in the Premier League, but there are fans of 150 other clubs who would happily bite your arm off for mid-table in the Premier League. I think where it did happen, where it really helped, is when I first started doing Match of the Day 2. I think it really helped that fans that I was talking to knew I supported an unsuccessful, unfashionable club, for want of a better word, and they also knew that I went to the games. I think if I was doing that job as a Liverpool fan or an Arsenal fan, I think fans might have been more wary of me to take. I think you get a little bit more credibility somehow, even, which I know, my dear friend Alan Davis goes to Arsenal every home and away game. He goes to Arsenal, travels abroad for Arsenal games, and he will still get called a plastic Arsenal fan because he's on telly a lot and he's clever and does QI, and it infuriates him. But I think I do get a certain credibility. I think Palace fans who are comics get a certain credibility in terms of supporting a team that people know that if you've carried on supporting Palace, you probably are a proper fan, basically.
The weekend, I have to concur with Roy Hodgson's comments about, well, the general comment in that football is going in the wrong direction. I've watched the highlights of the game this morning, and I share your frustration, because it frustrates me in the sense of, if anybody so there's a little bit more of players, particularly the Premier League, kicking the ball away, right, and getting away with it, right. And then you get situations that you have on Saturday. The second one, okay, maybe I can see it's a foul, maybe a booking, but doing what he did for the first one, I just think that's appalling. Unless somebody turns around and says, right, at the start of the season, like the Timbuktu PGMO, I'll say, right, here it is, you're going to get booked if you argue with the referee, you're going to get booked if you don't go back 10 yards, you're going to be booked if you're going to kick the ball away, then there should be consistency in that. But now you're in December, in a situation where you're on top playing against a team that are high above you in the league, but playing poorly, and that changes the game because of, for me, certainly one really poor decision.
But it wasn't one poor decision.
Well, only the highlights.
I was at that game, and the trouble is, we've reached a situation. I interviewed Roy Hodgson a few weeks ago for the Palace fanzine I do. We had the 500th episode, and Roy very kindly came on to do the show, and he was fascinated. He didn't want to talk about the current Palace team, which made life easier in a way, because he just talked about his history. But he talked about the fact that he was actually quite looking forward to not being a football manager anymore because of the way things have changed. That game on Saturday, there were 17 fouls from each team. Palace committed 17 fouls. Liverpool committed 17 fouls. We had 7 yellow cards and a red. They had 2 yellow cards, both of which were after the 90th minute. We've reached a situation where the PGMOL allowed 4 really experienced managers to leave at the same time. Atkinson, Dean, John Moss, one other. And as Roy Hodgson said, the new managers have got to get experience somewhere, but I'd rather they weren't getting that experience in Palace games. Right? New referees are getting that experience somewhere. And you've got a situation where I've got no doubt, and of course fans of smaller clubs will say this, there is a certain amount of awe from new referees to managers like Jurgen Klopp, in the same way that Ferguson had it. I remember talking to Graham Poll, who, I'm not going to apologise, but Graham was a friend of mine. And Graham said once about refereeing at Old Trafford, he said, at Old Trafford, you didn't give a free kick against Man United at Old Trafford unless you were 61-59 certain. Because you played out all the scenarios in your head as to what would happen before and after if you gave a free kick that turned out wasn't properly a free kick against Man United. So, of course, referees are subject to those sort of biases. But I think we're seeing it more now. And I think VAR is making it worse. I think VAR is making life worse for referees. And you talk about all this nonsense about a sin bin. What you've just said about referees applying the rules differently, that's why a sin bin won't work. Because each referee has got different criteria for what he thinks is unacceptable consent. And also, we've got a way of dealing with dissent, and that's the yellow card. That Man United-Tottenham game 2-3 weeks ago, Haaland, if the referee had given Haaland a yellow card straight away when he was screaming in his face at the end, and then gave him a red when he didn't stop screaming, that's the end of the situation. Why would Haaland wouldn't be scared of going into a sin bin for the last 30 seconds of that game? And I do feel sorry for referees, because we keep saying referees have got to be consistent, but they've also got to use common sense. And those two things are contradictory. You can't have common sense and consistency. But we're in a situation at the moment where I've got, and I hate saying it because I'm on the side of the referees, but with just this season and last season, the standard of refereeing isn't good enough. It simply isn't good enough. And you look at the referee on Saturday, he's refereed 12 Liverpool games. And Liverpool are a brilliant side. He's refereed 12 Liverpool games. They've won 11, drawn 1. I think he's given 5 yellow cards to Liverpool in that time, and he's given about 48,000 yellow cards to other teams in that time. So there's an issue in the Premier League, but the biggest issue is that we let all those experienced referees go out at the same time.
Well, I'd say that the same thing applies to, because now you go to the football and the main person for to be irritated by is always been the referee, right? Even whether you're playing or whether you're watching, it's the referee, and so maybe occasionally the assistants. But when you're announcing what's happening, you've got the referee, and now you've got the VAR referee. So you've now got 2 referees that you could be applying the same criteria to, and it's particularly a thing way in Scotland because most people support one team or the other, so you're always going to be, oh no, it's him. Can't believe, oh look who's the VAR referee. And I think that for me, it's the same thing. And I've said, right at the beginning of the VAR, not long after VAR, the wrong people are in the VAR room.
Mm.
It's the people who do the analysis on match of the day, for example, who should be in the VAR room.
That's a good point, yeah.
Because I think that because you've done it for so long, since you were tiny and then became professionals, and some coached and some managed and now doing punditry, you can see, a lot of times when somebody's feigning injury, falling over, diving, or trying to seek an advantage or whatever other thing it is. And I think if you ask most players, ex-players, they can still apply impartiality to particular games, even if they played for whatever particular clubs. The same as the referees are bound to have, if they love football, they're bound to have a football team that they follow.
Yeah.
You're listening to Life with Brian.
I'm just waiting for Sparky to do his own podcasts, but this one came along first, so...
Shocky will back me up on this. Anything deep fried tastes great.
It was Robbie Williams, and he's like, Dominic, you survived the 90s as well. How did we do it?
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Having a Crystal Palace fan of a certain vintage on a podcast of a Manchester United player of a certain era, I've got a couple of questions for you, Kevin. Firstly, 1990 FA Cup final. Are you over it yet?
Oh, mate, well, that would indicate the answer is no, wouldn't it? It's Steve. It was our first. If there's ever a statue at Selhurst Park, it's going to be of Steve Coppell. And I know this will come as a bit of a shock to Ian Wright and Mark Bright, who both think it should be them. I don't know how I do it. Mark, you can always tell the difference between Mark Bright and a ray of sunshine. And I always manage to find ways to upset. We were talking recently because Mark Bright and Wrighty was saying, there should be a statue, jokingly, but he's saying there should be a statue of me and Brighty at Selhurst Park. So I said, so we have a statue of you, Ian, and then we have a statue of Brighty 5 yards behind you, trying to catch up. which then I got the lecture from Brighty then about how bad his knee was at Port Vale. But Steve Coppell, Steve Coppell was our most successful manager. He got us to that FA Cup final. We got us to third in the old First Division. He rescued us several. He came back to managers 4 times. But the excitement around that FA Cup final for us, because that was our first one, and we'd had that brilliant semi-final, which still, to this day, the moment... I've spoken to my wife about this. The day I got married was a wonderful day. The day my son was born was a wonderful day. The best second of my life was when the final whistle went at Villa Park for that game. Because just so much... The 80s were a shit show for us as a club. And that getting to that final was brilliant. We played really well. The first game through a neutral was a cracking game. And then that second game, that replay, and we wore that fucking cursed kit. For some reason, we wore a yellow and black kit. that we'd never, ever worn in our life. And clearly some idiot at the club thought, well, this will be the cup-winning kit. We'll sell millions of those afterwards. It was a terrible game, that replay. It was a terrible, it's just so... It was heartbreaking. So the answer is no, I haven't got over it, basically. And I'm
Brian probably doesn't remember it.
And I'm looking at the people that caused that heartbreak. Look at him in the face now.
I do remember that, and it's clearly, I mean, that for us, it's the first game going 1-0 up. You think, oh, well, this is, normally in cup finals, you score the first goal, and then you have, as I say, it was, I think, my recollection is the same, a really, really good game, and disappointing for Palace to be 3-1 up when Ian came on as sub and scores those 2 goals, and you're thinking, 3-1 down with whatever time to go. This is it, particularly when you're thinking that you're going to concede every time that Crystal Palace are having an attack, and then like it's been a situation right through probably Manchester United's history, but certainly through Alex Ferguson's history of late goals, so 2 late goals, and you're coming in pretty elated that you've got another opportunity to play in the cup final, to play at Wembley again,
Did you both know when that finished 3-3? Did you both know deep down in your heart of hearts that was Palace's chance gone?
Yeah, most Palace fans, in the same way that if we'd had to play Liverpool again in the replay in that semi-final, they would have battered us. They were so much a better team than we were. Steve Coppell changed his tactics. He put Richard Shaw on Peter Beardsley, man-marked him for the first. So actually in the second half of that, first half of that game, we could have been 3-0 down at Villa Park. The second half of that game, we actually played quite well in a sort of gung-ho cavalry charge type way. But we thought we had a chance because United were we saved Ferguson's job, essentially. United were I wouldn't say it's a crisis, but United weren't. Oh, yeah, United weren't the unbeatable team that they were to become years after. So we thought we had a chance to beat them, but most of us felt it felt like we'd lost when we left that first game, I have to say. And also the other thing as well, for a lot of Palace fans, it was our first proper visit to Wembley for a proper game. You may have been to England games, some of us, but not in my case. But it's actually quite disappointing to realise younger people won't know what a dreadful shithole Wembley was at the time. It was an awful place, and you kind of walked away going, "I'm really disappointed. We have to go back there."
I think that probably sums up the whole game on the Thursday, because for my point of view is that Steve changed his tactics in that game.
It did,
and what happened? They just tried to be more physical,
much more physical,
and it didn't. If they'd had a goal of the game the same way like they did on the Saturday and then the semi-final, I think it could have went either way. But I think that the idea that it was whatever idea it was didn't work, and Lee Martin ends up scoring a goal and we win the game 1-0. But it was a dreadful game.
It was his only goal for you, wasn't it? Or his first goal?
His only goal for Manchester United.
Of course it was.
Not a bad only goal to have, is it?
But in the way that football fans' mentality works, we could have gone home blaming the tactics and the over physicality, but we blame the kit. It's like we was never going.
But often you can say, well, we had the same situation when we had that grey kit.
Oh Lord, that was terrible, that kit. Wasn't it?
But I'll say, forget that game. Before that, right? There's 2 things happened with that grey kit, and I know you're fascinated by kits. And
I am. I love it. Yeah.
So we'd been in pre-season in the Far East, and we wore that kit, I think, in either Thailand or Malaysia. And I remember particularly that because it was so humid, we'd lost a lot of fluid and things like that. Anyway, the kit man Albert had got the kit washed, and when it came back, it had shrunk. So once it's telling you about the quality of the kit right away, right? So it shrunk, so that's fine. So anyway, at the time we'd played a couple of games, and it's the worst colour to pick out against the crowd. And we had a vision scientist at Manchester United, and she was saying that, look, the players are kind of difficult because the man is quite like going berserk because people were passing the ball more regularly straight out, right? Because they thought they saw a player. Because you're quite quickly, the game's going to go quickly. You look over and see a player and you pass it. And it wasn't a player, it's somebody in the crowd because you're kind of tuned to this grey strip. So they decided that, what we'll do is, so I was playing the game for the reserves at Chesterfield, right? So we go into the changing room before the game and the kit man's putting the kit out and I'm going, what the fuck is this? You know, he says, we've got this grey top on. And there's red shorts and red socks. I said, what are these? They're not marked up or anything. They're not Umbro. They're just out of local, whatever you could get them from the market, right? Red shorts and red socks. I said, what is this? So they said, it's an experiment to see whether it's really to do with the grey. And because you're playing the reserves and it's against the Terracing, it was like the Manchester United players were running around. What you could see there's their arse and their legs and their heads and nothing in between, right? Nothing in between. We came in at the dressing room at the end of the game and somebody had stolen the rest of the shorts and socks and left the grey kit.
They obviously couldn't see it.
That's
what I said. Yeah, they clearly couldn't see that.
What shocks me about that story is that you said you had a vision scientist at the club.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What was that all about? What a gig's that? What did he have to do?
Well, she was. Well, actually, she found out that David De Gea had a sight problem when he first came.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have thought that it'd have been part of the medical, wouldn't it? Rather than, well, maybe we should ask somebody to just have a look, check the goalie's eyes out, you know.
Do you know what I like about that story as well? And it's an indicator of how modern football has changed, is that I can guarantee that not one single Premier League club has got a kit man called Albert anymore. Those you miss the people like Albert who, for no apparent, and apparently played. There's a bloke. I remember going to Arsenal to do some filming, and there was this bloke called Reg, and I asked somebody what Reg did, and they went, "We don't know. We just kept him on. He played here in the 50s, and he's got a little cubby hole. We don't know what he does, but we don't like to get rid of him." You know, that's really it. We spoke to somebody on our pod recently. This woman from Colourblind Awareness. So they reckon there's probably about 8 or 9% of footballers are colourblind, but are too reluctant to mention it in case they miss out on a move to a club that wear a kit that they can't actually see. Which would explain a lot of Palace's performance recently. But
maybe that was the reason for that yellow and black thing.
It may possibly.
Just to talk about kit, because I heard you speaking recently that if you came into a huge sum of money, I assume if you won the Euro Millions or something like that, the first thing you would do would be to buy Crystal Palace and change the kit back to, what was it, back to?
Claret and blue. It's again, it's one of those discussions you have in the pub. It's like, and as my wife says to me, so you're going to buy the club, right? And you're not worried about getting in the Champions League or attracting the best players. Like, no, I just want to go back to a claret and blue kit. As simple as that. So I love the red and blue kit, but for me, it's to do with when you start watching it. I don't think you ever love football more than you do between the age of sort of 7 and 12.
Right.
That's when you're obsessed with football. That's when you know every club in Europe, in Britain, you know the managers, you know the nickname, you know the cap, you know everything there is to know about football. And that's for me, that first Palace kit, claret and light blue stripes with a yellow trim. That's what I see when I close my eyes and think about Palace. And think, so I'm not in life. I'm not nostalgic in life because and I think Brian will agree with this. I do get nostalgic about some parts of football because you look at. You watch Match of the Day Revisited and you go, oh, this is great. And then you think, oh my God, that kit, how did they play on the pitch? The pitches were terrible. And you look at the physical nature of the game and you look at some things about football have changed so much for the better, but there are some things that will always stay in your mind as being the best thing ever about football. And for me, that Palace kit, I've got a Subbuteo, a mate of mine painted a Subbuteo version of that kit for my 60th birthday, which is the best present I had, which really annoyed everybody else who spent a lot of time and effort buying me presents. And the one I was most pleased about was a shonky painted Subbuteo kit.
But that's somebody had paid attention to what you liked, isn't it? Which is,
that's exactly so. As I mistakenly said to my wife afterwards, somebody paid attention to what I really wanted.
I agree with you. I think and again, it might be just because of a certain time. I just think that you've been, all of us really have been through the golden age of football.
Yeah.
And I think that stopped maybe 10 years ago, maybe further back than that, but I definitely think that's the golden. I know you can the pictures and all these other things and the dodgy strips, but I get more annoyed watching football now than I ever did when I was playing.
Do you know what? I still love football, bro. I still love football. And I'd be lying if I say I care less about Palace, which I don't, but I care less about football in general than I used to. But what's interesting about the kit, because I keep this quiet in general, Brian, Mark, and Matthew, because
don't tell us then.
Well, no, I don't. I don't hate Manchester United as much as I feel I should do. The reason partly being because I love the Manchester music, the Joy Division, the Buzzcocks, the Smiths, music that I love. But also my all-time idol is George Best. George Best is my all-time idol, and I feel I can't hate the club where George Best was at his most magical. But when I think of George Best, it's the plain red kit, not even a badge, plain red kit, white collar. That's how I picture George Best, and I think you're always most in love with that sort of 5-year period when you first fell in love with the game, and it's never quite as important as that again. And it's when you see just a photograph of George Best with his hand in the air will just make me quite emotional, because it just reminds you of a time when football was your all-consuming passion. Because no matter how much you love football, you reach the age of 17, 18, and you have to work, you have to, you fall in love. It starts to move away from the centre of your life. And I think every football fan in a way misses it. I mean, there are still those sad fans who go to every academy game and reserve game and that you're supposed to applaud. But when you really want to put an arm around them and say, mate, seriously, get something else in your life. You know what I mean? The people who still buy 2 programs, one to write on and one to put in a plastic bag, because their mobile phone isn't modern enough to get team news on that, basically. But there's still there's that part of me that still yearns for that period of time when I just loved football more than anything in the world.
That will explain your fondness, I suppose, for Dunfermline.
Well, that's my favourite football photograph. The Dunfermline player who's been against Celtic, and it took me ages when I was doing research for my first book, and I thought I had a false memory of it. I knew I'd seen it somewhere, and it took me ages to track it down. And again, this is what football fans are brilliant, like, because in the end, on social media, I put this request out, and football fans just go, right, perfect, this is right up our street. And it's just a photograph of I think it's about 1967, and the Dunfermline player's in so much agony from a tackle that he's biting the shin pad of the Celtic player, I've never dreamt of looking up what happens to the Dunfermline players in case something really bad, but it's the best football photograph ever. It's the most amazing football photograph, and it summed up what football was like at that time, because the Celtic player's not looking at him with any great degree of sympathy, but he's allowing his shin pad to be bitten, which I think is the nicest thing a bloke could do to another bloke back in the 60s. It was, these days we all have to talk to each other. In those days, the only concession another man would make to another man's pain was to let him bite his shin pad. That's it. And a part of me misses those times.
The Dunfermline player wasn't Alex Ferguson.
I don't think it was. I don't think Alex would show weakness like that, would he? But Alex wouldn't show weakness by biting somebody else's shin pad, surely.
Well, I was going to move away from football briefly and just ask you, Kevin, how does one go from being an HR manager to being one of the country's top stand-up comedians?
Partly by being a cocky sod. I was never particularly. I was quite good at school. I loved school, but I wasn't particularly intelligent. I like learning. I still love learning now. I think it's brilliant. I love finding things out, and the older I get, I used to worry that would stop when I got older, but I love finding things out. But I was never particularly bright at school. I was all right at sport, but not good enough to be picked out. I was quite funny, but even better, I was that idiot kid who, when every other kid knew to stop taking the piss out of teachers, I was the one who carried on doing it. So funny was my only thing, but it was never something that I wanted to do a bit. I went to university to study archaeology because I wasn't particularly. I thought, well, the only thing I've got, I can either be a history teacher or maybe an archaeologist. And unfortunately, on my second day at university, I fell in love with this slightly older girl who was an agriculture student who had a more down-to-earth attitude towards romance, shall we say, than any other girl I'd met before. So I ended up something to do with being from Cornwall and studying agriculture, is what I guess. But I ended up being asked to leave university after 6 weeks, which I was quite happy about, as I hadn't seen a trowel once, not one trowel. And I ended up, I got a job at a building site the week after, and ironically got a trowel on my first day, which was great. But, I ended up, I wasn't a particularly happy 19-year-old, but I ended up with this job at the London Ambulance Service as a clerical officer, and I ended up working for the NHS for 7 years. I'm very, very proud of the time I spent working for the NHS. I think the NHS, along with the BBC, are the most remarkable institutions this country have ever come up with, and I think I would defend the NHS to my dying day. But we started going to see comedy. Me and my mates would start to go and see, because at the age of 17, 18, that's when you go to, if you're not going to football, you go into music, basically. And in those days, Brian will tell you, there were music venues everywhere. Most of them have disappeared now, but every second club had an upstairs room. So you were never short of music, and we would support local bands. But then we started going to comedy, and I was the one, we went to a particular comedy club near us, and I used to sit there going, why are we paying £5 to watch these middle-class twats wanking around? None of this is fucking funny. And eventually, one of my mates, just to shut me up, booked me an open spot at another venue, just because they thought once I'd done that and realised how difficult it was, I might shut up. So I did it, and I was nervous, but I wasn't scared because I had no intention of doing it again. But I did it again because the guy asked me to come back again, and then he asked me to come back and do 10 minutes. And I quite liked it. But it didn't occur to me for a moment that a working class kid could be a comedian, because all the people that were performing comedy, probably Steely accepted, but people that I loved, people like Jeremy Hardy, for example, all seemed to me to be middle class. It all seemed to me that they were ex-university or drama school. So it didn't occur to me that there was a way in. And then I met this chap called Bob Boyton, who's a comic, who was a bisexual Stalinist who had several jokes about the Queen Mother, which could never be repeated outside a live environment. And he was clearly very working class, and he encouraged me. And I started doing it, and I fell in love with it. I found something I loved, really loved, and then started to get passionate about. And I started to get passionate about the history of comedy. But then what was happening was, by this time, I was quite a senior manager at the London Ambulance Service, and I had to call a girl into my office one morning and say, "Look, your punctuality record's really bad," And she said, "Well, I'm not going to take that from you, because the last 3 times I was late, you turned up later than I did, because I'd been gigging till so." And then basically, I had an opportunity to go to the Edinburgh Festival, and Edinburgh is still. I love Glasgow, Brian. I've got family in Glasgow. I will always love Glasgow, but Edinburgh is a wonderful place for me because it's been such a part of my life. I was asked to go to Edinburgh Festival in 1988. I'd already used up my annual leave, so I had to make a decision. So I went professional for it. I've never quite got over changing from getting paid every month and having my tax deducted at source to being freelance, which is why I've got such a good relationship with. And this is a true story. I used to be with Sutton Tax Office, which is just down the road from me, and somebody at another tax office of a higher level decided I should move from there because there were clearly too many Palace fans at Sutton Tax Office who weren't that fussed about when I paid my tax or not. So I got moved up to Fleetwood Tax Office, so I deal with two. But I just fell in love with it, and it became. And I was lucky because it was a particularly formative time, if you like. If music, comedy at the time still felt a little bit underground. It was just before the whole comedy is the new rock and roll thing. It was just before the whole DVD era. So there was a whole generation of comics. And my wife was a stage manager at the Comedy Store. She was the first ever stage manager there. So she was kind of a comedy auntie to a whole generation of people like Alan Davis and Jack Dee and Joe Brand and Mark Thomas, my generation. And it was exciting and it's felt underground. And I've never fallen out of love with it. And despite all the other things I do, and I don't do that many gigs now because there comes a time when you have to sort of move aside. But also my son, Ed Knight, is a fantastic comic. He's a brilliant, fearless comedian. And so I kind of wanted to move out of the way and give him more space. But I'll probably do 5-6 gigs a year, and most of those are benefits. But I still call myself a comedian. That's, as far as I'm concerned, if people say to me, what do you do for a living? I'll say I'm a stand-up comedian. And I think I'll keep saying that even if I don't do another gig again, because it's how I define myself now. And I define my personality as Palace defines me in many ways, because I come from a part of South London that you can't really point to on a map. There's no landmarks. It's where sort of Streatham becomes Mitcham, becomes Tooting. So unless you live there, if people say, where are you from? And you go, well, I'll have to explain. But Palace gives me my identity. The thing, I still now, I get so proud when people say to me, they'll stop me and they don't necessarily know who I am, but they'll go, oh, you're a Palace fan. And that makes me so happy. And people will still stop me and say, oh, I love your book, or I love your pod, or I remember that gig. Increasingly rarely, but they still do. But people know I'm a Palace fan, and that makes me so happy. And it makes me, the fact that I'm a trustee of the foundation at Palace makes me so happy. But so there are two things to me. I see myself as a comedian. I see myself as a Palace fan. There are times I can understand why my wife might worry about those two things, because, you know, the family, I always remember to go, family man, of course. Family's very important, but comedy and football are the two things that make up most of my life. And I'm not ashamed of that, because I think they're two wonderful things to be involved in.
Yeah. I mean, Brian's always said, and I seem to always pick up on this every week, but Brian, you always said that you felt football was a hobby you just got paid for. I mean, do you feel that way about comedy?
That's really, do you know what? I think it's easier for someone like Brian to say, who is very, 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 very good at what they do. And I've met a lot of footballers, and I used to write for Gary Lineker a long time ago, and then I became the person who wrote his adlibs when he started presenting stuff. And then Gary, I remember that was a very proud day when Gary phoned us and said, I'm going to do my own adlibs from now on. It's like taking the wheels off a toddler's bike and pushing him off. But I still get texts from people after match day 2 saying, did you write that terrible pun? I go, no, he writes his own puns now. But Gary was the same. When you talk, I used to ask Gary about football all the time. And I remember saying to Gary once, just please explain what it's like when you score a goal in front of 10,000 of your home fans. He said, I can't really explain what it's like. And then he said to me, can you explain what it's like to get a huge laugh at the end of a show? And I said, no, I can't really. And it's like, unless you've done those things, you can't really explain to people. But I never felt, again, it comes back to that imposter syndrome thing. I never felt comedy was a hobby for me, because I had to work hard at doing it, because it wasn't something that I ever thought I would do as a kid. It wasn't something I thought was that's what I'm working towards. I never thought I was naturally funny enough to just get on stage and talk. So I always had to work hard at being a comedian, and I was pleased to do so. So no, it was my job, it was my profession, it was my craft. But I never really thought of it. I considered myself really lucky to do it. And again, there are a lot of people who say, well, why do you say luck? But there is luck involved for a lot of people. People like Mickey Flanagan, for example, will tell you, and I think Mickey's a wonderful comedian, but Mickey will tell you that he was lucky enough to be at the right place at the right. He was lucky enough to get the job. Somebody fell out of a Jonathan Ross show. Mickey went on, did brilliantly, and his career skyrocketed from there. So there is an element of luck about, and in the same way there is with footballers, Brian, as well. And it's tragic that still 99.8% of young players are not picked up by clubs. But it could be that a coach, a player's got a tummy ache one day, a kid's got and he just happens to have a bad game when the wrong coach is watching. So there is an element of luck there. But I worked hard at being a comic, so I never really saw it as a hobby.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, I'll just give you a couple of quick things. when people ask me what was the best thing about being a football player, I always said about scoring a goal. It's the best feeling ever. It was better than sexual intercourse. And it usually lasted longer. So there you go. That's it for me. The second part is that luck does play a part. You ask any football player, whatever it is, how they get an opportunity. You need an opportunity to play in the first team. And there's only maybe about 5 or 6 different things. Someone in your position is injured. Someone has fallen out with the manager. Someone is suspended. There is no one else for whatever reasons. And they're sort of the main, they're the main reason. Somebody's not available that has been playing. For whatever the reason, they're not playing. You get the opportunity, then it's your turn, your chance. Yeah. Can you stay in the team, basically, you know?
Right, you talk about the joy of scoring a goal. One of the things I don't understand about football now, I hate expected goals, drives me up the wall. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't like maths. I don't see the point of it. But what I get really baffled by is when we now see the assist stats for every player, every striker. And you will hear a commentator saying, there was one particular game, Haaland hadn't scored, but he came off and he had 2 assists. And he went, oh, well, he'll be happy with that. As a striker, Brian, to be honest,
No, you don't.
Are you happy with...
All of that's shite, right? It's only all that matters is scoring goals, right? It doesn't matter who's scoring the goals, right? So scoring the goals is what matters, right? So it's the same kind of thing. To choose a backward an analogy. If we'd lost a goal in the game, we didn't necessarily be looking and thinking the manager's going to go daft at the goalkeeper, whoever it had to be, right? Because we knew his idea of it. It might have been because I had a shot when I shouldn't have had a shot, a pass when I shouldn't, a cross when I shouldn't have, and we lost possession. And he would analyse it like that. So you come in sometimes, and you'd be the one to get your get the hairdryer and you knew you were going to get it because you'd fucked up, right? So the other way around is going, well, how do you know? Because you're the last person to have accidentally. See, some of the times I've mishit the ball, right? And it's trickled through and it's created a chance for somebody. And other times you tried to pass it through and it's been thinking. So for me, it's like, well, why is that significant, you know? And it's not, it doesn't make any difference to me. And I just think it's something else to talk about. It's about partner scoring the goals. And we go back to an earlier conversation. Why I think it's terrible and so disappointing football now is because VAR has stolen, right? There's only 2 important things in football and any kind of sport, really, team sport more, is the supporters, the fans, and the players. They're the only 2 important groups of people, right? There's this thing that's come into it where coaches have tried to become whatever it is, but they're not really, right? So it's the players playing for your team and the supporters of your team. And the best thing about that is celebrating when you score a goal, and you can't do that now.
Right.
In most situations, always looking over, I'm offside, look at the referees, they're going to point to, and that second bit where it's either given or not given is not as, certainly if the goal is given, it's a more of a, oh yeah, well, good. That was good. That was a relief. Whether it should be a great joy of not necessarily running up to the corner flag, pulling your shirt over your head and all that. But for me, that is what it was. Celebrating that moment with the supporters, and VAR's robbed football of that.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm really reluctant to because like my son's 27, he thinks football's the best it's ever been. Of course he does, because he doesn't remember the bad times at Palace, and he's baffled by my nostalgia for football because he knows I'm not particularly nostalgic in the rest of my life. But it's just the time it takes as well, Brian. It's that again coming back to that Palace Liverpool game. Oddly enough, the first penalty that we didn't get, we all thought watching it, the referee waved play on, and we all thought, no, it looks like Will Hughes has fouled him there. They're going to call that back. The second one he did give, it was, we were spending 2 minutes. We saw that was a penalty. It took 2 minutes for the ref to even go and look at the screen. So by that time, you kind of go, I don't really care now anymore. But like you say, it's that transcendent split-second joy. I'll come back to that 1990 game as well, when we were 1-0 down at half-time, and Steve Coppell famously had said to the Palace team, just keep it tight for 10 minutes. And John Pemberton had a rush of blood to his head, ran down, crossed the ball in. That split second of disbelief and in utter joy that you'd scored, and it was carnage. And I got moved about 30 yards down. So the thought that you could suddenly have looked up and, oh no, the VAR sign's gone up. And the fact is as well, you can find a reason to disallow any goal if you want to. And if anybody can describe to me what a clear and honest error is, I don't know, because for the most part, the referee makes a decision in good faith. You stop it and slow it down. There are sometimes at the end of this pod you could slow a bit down and you say that bit, it wasn't funny, because of course you could if you slow it down and rewind it. But at the time, I thought that bit would be funnier than it was. But at the time, you can analyse anything. If you read your favourite book, the favourite quote in your favourite book 5 times in 10 minutes, you'll go, I don't like that quote anymore. And that's what's happening to the game at the moment. And I hate finding myself being one of those people who uses those. I remember my dad stopped going to games when Peter Bonetti wore gloves for the first time. He saw Peter Bonetti wearing gloves on telly. My dad went, that's
game's
it.
Gone.
Game's gone, basically. And I persuaded, and then he kept taking me until we turned up at one season and it was £5 to get in. And he went, I'm not, and he lifted me over the turnstile. And he only ever went to a game again if I took him into a box, because he went, I'm not paying £5 a game to go and watch football. And that's my understanding now. And it's when one of the reasons we got so upset with Roy Hodgson after the Bournemouth game. And I love Roy Hodgson. I've got so much time for him. But when he said afterwards, Palace fans can't expect to turn up every home game expecting goals and entertainment and beating teams like Bournemouth. I pay £700 a year for my season ticket. The one thing I expect is to be able to turn up and see a bit some goals. We've won 4 home games in the last 12 months, and 3 of those were last April. That's a lot of money to keep turning up at a ground and not expecting to win, and also taking the referee. We've reached the stage where the referee's name is announced now, and you just go, we can't win this game. And that's not fair on fans. And I know people go, well, of course you say that because you're not one of the big 6, big 7, whatever. But that's how it's become. And I hate being that bloke who says that. I really do. I really want to be the person who goes, come on, everybody, football's brilliant, isn't it? It's wonderful. No, it's not. Stop bringing out free kits a season. There's no need for it. Stop wearing your away kit when your colours don't clash. That drives me up the wall. There's so many things that I've become that bloke who... I'm driven up the wall by things. Yeah,
I agree with that, and it's part of you same kind of thing that you're talking about earlier. Fergie's not you, but talking about earlier. I listened to you talk about is, and it applies to any kind of football fan.
Yeah,
you want to go. You're saying you're just talking about your boy and that kind of thing. I know he's older now, but for the fan who has, and the wonderful thing about football now as well is that the girls want to go as well as your sons and daughters want to go, right? So they want to go and they want the kit. But you've got to, in quite the same way that it is, and that you've got to get the new kit, otherwise you're not. And I think it's a terrible pressure on people economically, who are going to have to sack. I don't know whether some people are not feeding themselves because they're saving up to buy their kits, whatever kit's coming out for Christmas. I mean, when I was working at Manchester, when I was hobbying at Manchester United as an academy manager, you get the one day the first team are training in one particular set of kit, all of it, and the next day and I said to Albert, what's happening here? He says, this is the winter training kit. I go, what? What's happened to all that other kit then? Oh well, that's finished now. It's just a joke, so. Because people want to buy that as well, they'll see
of course.
the managers or the subs or whatever else in a different training kit. Oh, got to keep up to date and get that. And it's a lot of money for football.
I don't think Palace now have this thing where you can pay for your season ticket in instalments, which is great to an extent. But I don't think Premier League clubs in particular fully realise the economic hardship that's going on out there. People will go, Chelsea, Arsenal fans, they can afford that. You only have to walk half a mile from Arsenal's ground to areas of real economic deprivation. It's the same with Palace. SE25 and Croydon, people are skint out there. And what's starting to happen is I've got quite a few mates this season who are now going to Sutton United, or they're going to see Palace women's team because they can afford to. The atmosphere is nicer for their kids. They can have a pint in a much more salubrious situation. And I think people of our generation in particular are falling out of love with football. And I think the Premier League need to be careful because they're not making it attractive enough for the new generation coming up to replace us. And, simple things like, I'm so infuriated by this. The fact that we're playing Everton in the third round of the FA Cup.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been moved to Thursday night at Selhurst Park for ITV4. Right. And that, I know from working in broadcasting, ITV4, they'll be lucky to get 30,000 people watching that. All right. And you're inconveniencing 3,000 Everton fans. And they will still come, even though it's Thursday night, generally, they'll still come to Selhurst Park somehow. And people will still go on about the atmosphere. Oh, the atmosphere is brilliant. The fans turn up. But it's despite what football are doing to them, not because of what football are doing to them. It's like, Newcastle having to play at 5 o'clock at Fulham or the other way around. It's just not right. Fans are taken for granted so much. And then in the end, you can only do that for so long before they start to go, we've got other options here, or we simply can't afford to do it.
Previously on Life with Brian.
I said, Prime Minister, stop talking. And I'm peeing against the wall, and there's two old guys behind me, and one says to the other, the laddie doesn't ken any better.
Pubic hairs on a cracker, the worm sandwich, he actually chewed it.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
I wanted to go on to football finance, which is our next section. But before I do, I just wanted to touch on something. You were joking about assists there. I was going to your, as a comedy writer, you were talking about writing for Gary Lineker. Is writing for somebody else the assist of of being a comedian? It's
I don't write for other stand-ups anymore. It's always a sensitive area among stand-ups, whether they should get other stand-ups to help them out with stuff. I don't write for other stand-ups because it's the most deeply unsatisfying. You lose control of, and it's so. I love working at Have I Got News For You. It's one of my favourite jobs, but it's really frustrating because there's no guarantee that this funny joke you write is going to be the funny joke that gets chosen to be in the script, and then it's going to be the funny joke that whatever actor is presenting this week gets right and gets broadcast. So it's very frustrating. And one of the brilliant things about being a stand-up is because you write, produce, direct, edit your own show, you're completely in control of whether something works or something doesn't. And the beauty about being a stand-up of my experience is that's when you know you're a good stand-up, is when you can get a laugh out of something that doesn't get a laugh. Like when you first start and you don't get a laugh, you panic, you don't know what to do. But after a while, and when you're so happy on stage, you can get a laugh out of telling the audience off and not understanding that brilliant joke you just said. When you're offering stuff up to other comics, it just isn't. Even if I'm quite good at writing in other people's voices, but even if you're good at doing that, it's still, you write this stuff and you go, oh man, that's a good joke. I don't know if I want to give that to that comic. And then, so there's always that risk that you're giving them substandard stuff anyway, which you won't do because you're professional. But then you think, oh God. And then there's that frustration when you see them do it. And you think, no, that's not quite right. So no, it used to be quite lucrative, unfortunately, which is one of the reasons I wish I hadn't given it up. But it's really, as somebody, I know this sounds wanky, but as somebody who thinks of themselves as a creative performer, if you like, it isn't the same really. And I'm sure Brian feels the same way about right backs. Right backs can't enjoy playing football as much as strikers do. They know they're not really playing the same game. They know they're not as good.
Thankful they should be.
Yeah. Exactly. To be even being there.
just on that, I mean, what's your process with writing? I mean, you mentioned Have I Got News For You? People that don't know, you've been writing that show for many years. it must be tough, especially these days with 24-hour rolling news and social media. I mean, how many times do you throw away your script and think, I'm going to have to start this again?
The first thing to point out as well, and the producers are always very keen for me to point out, we only write for the host. Everything else on Have I Got News For You is improvised and spontaneous. So we only write the stuff that the host says down the camera, the jokes at the end, the grammar, if you like. The last 5 years since Brexit has been so difficult because it's hard to write satire about a government that is satirizing itself in a funnier way than you possibly can do. And what's difficult is one of the things, as much as I love the BBC, and I do, the BBC at the moment are so obsessed with balance. They're terrified of the Mail and the Telegraph. It's like walking on eggshells. It's like, so Have I Got News For You is one of those shows where basically they've just said, you're not going to get balance from this show. Most of the people in this show have a certain worldview, and they're the jokes that we're going to write. When we, please God, inevitably get a Labour government, then we will rethink, and we of course we'll start writing jokes about the government then, because that's our job. But at the moment, like it's really difficult to write jokes about a prime minister when you're not guaranteed the next day that prime minister is still going to be prime minister. And it's even what's even more annoying is when, and this government seem to have a habit of doing it now. We do most of our writing on a Wednesday and Thursday, and it's recorded on a Thursday. And I'm sure they're doing it deliberately. They will start sacking people on Thursday night, so we can't talk about it until the week after. And it's just like, but they're a shit show, and there's nothing you can. And it's just, in the end, the laughs become almost too easy. So you end up writing jokes about Rishi Sunak being short, and you don't want to write jokes about Rishi Sunak being short. You want to write jokes about the dreadful things he's doing. It's the same, but in the end, that's the easiest option because, that's the joke that's more likely to be used because anything else, the politics would have changed by the 2 days' time. And the BBC will be going, we're always having to go at the government. Well, that's our job. It's we speak truth to power. And at the moment, with Keir Starmer keeping himself to himself as he is doing, there's not a lot to write about there anyway. So, but I mean, how can you, Boris Johnson leaving in his Grimsby Town hat? It's just so... It's funny already. Without you, all you can do is point it out and wonder why that twat's wearing a Grimsby Town hat. And you write jokes about something smelling fishy and it's not Grimsby. It's just like It's just. But sometimes it gets because it's the same way you write jokes about Joe Biden being old. We don't really want to do that because there are more important things to write about. And it's Suella Braverman. You really, the woman was just evil. But the BBC go, no, well, let's not point that out. Let's write, witty jokes about I don't know. But yes, it's. I can't remember what the question was now. But
no, I don't.
Yes,
I was. I mean, now you mentioned that, I do wonder. Do you find yourself feeling a bit sort of hamstrung sometimes with this thing of having to please everybody? Because
yes,
it's the show where some people will say, oh, well, it's very anti-government, and then other people will say, oh, it's very centrist, or it's very not. And I get the feeling that you probably think, we can't. Really
do you know, that's a really interesting point, Matthew, because I still to this day don't know whether Ian Hislop votes Tory, Labour, Lib Dem or doesn't vote at all, because his argument is that you deal with even though he's part of the establishment, and he is, his argument is that you speak truth to power. The fact is, as you say, people will come up to me in the pub and say, I love Have I Got News For You. You really get everything right. Can I have tickets for the show? Other people will come up and go, oh, what's the matter with you? Telegraph readers, just have a go at the government properly. And other people will say, stop sitting on the fence. And other people will say, well, stop being lefty pinker. So you can't really win. You can only hope that the fact that you're annoying everybody means that you're kind of getting it right in a way. But across the BBC, their fear of tabloid response does make life more difficult than it used to be, without a doubt. And I understand why they're like that, because they worry about the licence fee. Of course they do. The constant assault. Just yesterday in the Mail, the headlines about Gary Lineker signing a letter. It's like, for fuck's sake, come on. The world's going to hell in a handcart. But the BBC, of course, they're worried about the constant battering that they get. So I understand it, but it does make writing jokes about the currency, especially when. And I won't lie, most of the writers share a left-wing viewpoint. We come from an alternative comedy background where that was that's what we've grown up with. That's what we're steeped in. And we understand ourselves that some of the jokes we get off our chest in the writing room, we know we can't present them to the producers or the host because they won't get used. We know that. But there is a certain frustration there when we have things to say. But then again, I can console myself by, I've got a gig coming up next week at Benefit. I can get all that off my chest. And I know that in a live situation, the people come to see me, most of them will share my point of view. And I'm quite happy to take the piss out of those people who don't share my point of view. So that's the beauty of performing live, basically. So you do have that outlet that some of the other writers don't have.
Kevin, you host the brilliant Price of Football podcast. Tell those who haven't listened before what they can expect from the show.
The bafflingly successful Radio Times Sports Podcast of the Year 2023.
That's the one.
Yeah, and such is the demographic of Radio Times readers that we weren't even the second oldest people to win. We were the third. There were two people older than us who won awards at the Radio Times League. It's a really strange trick, Mark. I love doing it. I love Kieran. I love doing that pod. I really wish we didn't have to do it. It's one of the few podcasts where the people presenting it would rather it didn't exist. And when the producer approached me 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago last week, I think, to suggest the idea for the pod, I said, well, good luck with that. Let me know how it goes. And he said, well, we'd like you to host it. And I said, look, I said, I generally don't think people want to listen to that. Also, I'm rubbish with money, which is one that he knew that for listening to me on 5 Live. He said, well, they're the reasons I want you to host it. Put me in touch with what he described as a groovy accountant. See that the alarm bell should have started ringing then. Groovy accountant. We did 4 shows before the groovy accountant revealed he was a Brighton fan, because I'm childish enough. I wouldn't have done it if he'd said he was a Brighton fan before. But we both thought it was a terrible idea. But both of us, I think there's more interest now in football finance than there ever has been in my life as a football fan. And growing up as a football fan, you kind of took for granted that the owner of your club was a local boy made good, as they always explained. You'd watch a game on telly and they'd zoom in on the chairman and they'd go, oh, he's made his money. And Ray Bloy, who was our chairman, was a butcher's accountant, a whole chain of butchers. He was the accountant. So, which explains why one game we signed a player on the pitch with half a dead cow hanging next to him. But you didn't take any notice. You turned up, you watched the game. The finances of football didn't interest you. And I think partly that's changed because of us. Because what happened, the very first story we covered properly was the demise of Bury, which was one of the most shameful episodes of English football. How that was allowed to happen, how the EFL allowed that to happen is bad. It shouldn't have happened. But we were the first people to really shine a light on that. And I think people picked up on our righteous anger about what was happening to football, and B, our hopeless romance about where football clubs stand at the heart of each community. We're both, for me, football clubs are one of the last remaining areas of working class history that you can talk about. Talks about badges and kits and nicknames. They're all to do with how that football club started and why that football club's in that particular area. I'm fascinated by how some of these clubs came about, and I think just people picked up on that. And as each broadcasting deal the figures got higher, as the Super League came along, as transfer fees got ridiculous, as agents' fees got ridiculous, I just think we became a place where people could turn to have their voices heard, to have their questions answered. And Kieran is incredible. Kieran, he's like Rain Man. He looks at a spreadsheet and he says it's as though somebody's highlighted the mistakes. He just sees them. And I have no head for figures. And I think I'm the sort of useful idiot. So I'm the conduit. I'm the way in for people. And the fact as well that right from the start, we've dealt with clubs all over the world. One of our first stories about Arbroath, we talk about, we'll talk as happily about a Scottish League One team as we will about Liverpool or Everton. And it's astonishing the people who listen to us in the game now, but it has put, it brings a strange pressure. Because I talk about it, that 2 hours before the game, which for me is my sacred time. Now what happens is, because in this pub we drink it, it's a proper old South London pub, but the landlord, God love him, Graham, he's put one of those little posters in the men's toilet going, it's okay not to be okay. So So now, I get blokes who I've known for years who will sidle up and just go, everything all right? So yeah, everything's fine. If there's an issue, I probably still wouldn't tell you. But even worse than that, people will come up to me and say, can you just explain how Chelsea are getting away with amortisation? I go, mate, no, I can't. I really simply just want to sit here and talk about whether we get. So it's really, it does put a sort of strange pressure where, but it's people love it. And I think as well, because we carried on through COVID, the amount of people who say to us that, we did it twice a week, same time every week. The amount of people who say to us, it was like a fixed point in a changing world. And the fact that you were always there, the fact that it's become a little sitcom as well, we've created these characters for each other. But we still take the piss out of each other with the Palace Pride. It's just breaking my heart. We had to do a couple of, we normally record at very specific times, which we had to change recently because he was going to Athens to watch Brighton play in the fucking Europe. And it's like, I had to sit there and swallow that. You know what I mean? And when he comes back, and I have to go, how was Europe? And he goes, great, it was really good.
But, listen to that. Racist taxi driver.
Yeah, he's a racist, exactly. Yeah, but it's good, but it just.
It sounded as if he was properly laying it on about everything had been, didn't it? We just went here, and we did this, and we ended up we in this, and
Yeah, I've got to go. Can we record on Tuesday? I'm going to Amsterdam. And, I don't envy him one bit, but it's that. I'd feel that responsibility thing again as well, because when you see like the Reading situation, Kieran predicted that 2 years ago. We've watched that become a little red flag to become a disaster. And Kieran, I was talking to Kieran last night about something else. He's genuinely worried about Reading. He thinks there's a chance that the hope is that they're too big to go out of business. But like I say, it's always great. We always have one or two stories that remind you how brilliant football fans are, how brilliant football clubs are at all levels. It's like Wolverhampton Wanderers introducing this brilliant little envelope for fans who suffer from Alzheimer's and memory loss. And if you're a carer or a relative, you just tell them that you're coming. They put the fan's name on the back of the seat in big letters. They give them a little wristband in case they wander off, and so there's a number that people can phone the relative. They give them loads of photographs and copies of old football programs, so it gives them memories. Something that costs probably £1 to do, but makes a massive difference. So stories like that really remind you how good things are in football. But unfortunately, 90% of the stories are, and because I love football fans, I worry about, and we saw it firsthand, the dismay of Bury fans when they went out of business. And we've had it twice at Palace. When Steve Parish and the consortium took over, we were 8 minutes away from being liquidated. 8 minutes away from being liquidated in 2010. I cried like a baby when the news came through that we would say, but we'd all, I'm not ashamed to say that, but we'd already reached the stage of talking about Phoenix clubs and how we were going to do it, because the thought of there not being a Palace to go to at any level, it just didn't bear thinking about. You couldn't encompass it. And people say it's not, and other people say, well, why do different rules apply to football? Why is any other business in Bury different? And my argument is that in the fifth largest economy in the world, no business in any needs to go out really without a struggle or a fight. But football brings so much more to a community. Football brings so much more to the people of Bury. It gives the whole town an identity. And also when a football club goes out of business, the printers who make the programme go out of business, caterers go out of business, pubs around the corner go out of business. The knock-on effect from a football club going out of business, there's no excuse with the money there is in football for any football club to ever go out of business. The fact that Bill Kenwright, God rest his soul, who was always very kind to me, in my industry as a producer of musicals, he was quite ruthless, but I thought he was a brilliant owner of Everton. Just didn't have as much money as the other millionaire owners in the Premier League. But the fact that he offered to lend money, £1 million to Bury, and the Football League turned it down because it would be a conflict of interest is absolutely outrageous. It's shameful, right? But there was no excuse for that football club to go out of business. There's no excuse for any football club to go out of business, because it isn't just any other business. It's simple as that, basically. That's when people say, why is it different? My answer is, it just is. It's not a big answer or a clever answer. but it just is, because the knock-on effect of any club going out of business is disastrous, not just emotionally, but physically for people of that area.
It's time for the quiz, for which I've probably spent far too much time putting together, as usual. Anyway, let's endure. As we've established, Kevin is a vital component in the continued success of Have I Got News for You on the BBC. So with that in mind, we've called this one, Have I Got News Headlines for You?
Oh.
Now, it's going to be the usual penalty shootout format. You get 5 goes each. And I've got internet headlines from football matches and stories down the ages. All you have to do is tell me whether these headlines are real or totally made up. So if they're true, please say certain.
Okay.
And if they're false and fabricated by me, please say Merton, as in Paul Merton.
Okay.
All right. You both happy with the setup?
I am, Mark. I always worry when I do people's quizzes because I don't know whether you want us to get none out of 10 because it shows you've done a really good quiz.
No.
Or you want us to get 10 out
they
of
want me to get nothing out of it.
Yeah.
We do gerrymander it sometimes.
Okay, Kevin, you're the guest, so you get to kick things off. And this is your headline. Keegan fills Schmeichel's gap with semen.
It's got to be certain, isn't it? That's so well constructed. That's got to be certain.
Yes, it is certain. Well done. This smut was published by the Sky Sports website in 2003 when the veteran keeper was signed by Kevin Keegan for Man City as replacement for Schmeichel. When Sky realised their initial double entendre, the offending headline was promptly changed.
Okay. Chucky, your opener is this. Matt takes Lettice out of Hoddle.
Certain.
No, you missed. It's Merton.
Oh.
Not a headline we could find, but Letizia has gone on record to say that his childhood hero, who he played for for Southampton and England, was, quote, a bit of a twat sometimes.
Wow, that's coming from Matt Letizia these days.
Well,
it's always more heartbreaking when someone you worship as a footballer goes wrong like that.
Yeah.
If it's Robbie Savage, you go, well, he was halfway there anyway.
Luckily, Brian hasn't done that to me yet.
Okay, Kevin, here's your second headline. Venerable Venables position untenable.
Oh, Merton.
It is a Merton, that's it. You've gone 2-0 up. Yes, it is a load of bollocks. Although I am quite proud of myself for shoehorning 3 roughly rhyming words into just a 4-word headline. Editors take note, I am available for freelance work. Good rates offered.
Next up, Brian, is yours. Brum promise internal butt probe.
You read that again.
Brum, yeah, just you want to make an idiot out of me, don't you? Brum promise internal butt probe.
Certain.
Yeah, believe it or not, it is.
Oh, really?
This comes from an incident where Nicky Butt stormed out of the Birmingham City team hotel when he found out he was dropped by manager Steve Bruce, 2 of your old mates. I wonder if Butt told Bruce he could stick it up his arse, maybe. I don't know what publication that you found that in, Mark, but.
I'd have to search it up again, but no, that is a real one. Okay, so 2-1 to Kevin, and your third one is this. Uh-oh, Mojo, old firm, no.
Oh, do you know what? It's a terrible thing. It must be a false memory, but I'm going certain for that one.
I've tricked you there. This is a Merton. Sadly, it's not a legit headline relating to Maurice Johnston's controversial decision to reject Celtic for Rangers in 1989. Although I do feel the Daily Record missed a trick there.
Yeah, definitely.
You should have asked me if you would use that because that's the unmentionable one.
Well, I know, but I thought you might have had an inkling, with him being one of your. Was he a mate of yours? He probably isn't anymore, but
teammate, yeah.
Yeah.
I never had any mates because nobody could understand me. So it was like, understand my sense of humour. So they stayed away from me.
Right, Chucky. I don't know what the score is, by the way.
It's 2-1, Kevin.
2-1.
Okay, so Chucky, headline number 3 is "Fucks off to Benfica."
Certain.
It is. From the Eurosport website in 2001, when the Brazilian centre-half joined Benfica from Palmeiras. In 2020, he respelled his surname, Fucks, F-U-C-K, replacing the K with an H, claiming the original spelling was a result of an error in his birth registry.
Right, so Chucky, you've pulled it back to 2-2, and all right, we're getting towards the business end now. And Kevin, your fourth one is this. Go on now, Joe, walk out Kufur.
That's too clever. It's got to be a Merton.
No, it's a true. It's a real one.
You're giving Mark too much credit for his headlines here.
Yeah, no. This is some superb musical work by the Sky Sports website this time, announcing the departure from Gillingham of striker Joe Kufur in 2012.
Damn. Very
Okay.
good.
Number 4 for you, Chucky.
This is like Wembley all over again.
I was just going to say that.
It's terrible.
Yeah, we got to all come back Thursday if it's a draw, by the way. Number 4 for you, Chucky, and this one's got a musical twist. Don't Clop Me Now.
Certain.
You've fallen for one of Mark's red herrings here. It's a Merton.
Ooh.
No link between the title of the Queen Classic and the Liverpool manager, although Freddie Mercury and Red Rum probably all shared the same dentist. I'm not sure. But,
All right. So, Kevin, this is to put the pressure on with your fifth and final headline. Old lady unable to masturbate at home.
This is a football one, is it?
Well, you tell me.
I've got to go certain.
Well done. It is certain. This is Goal.com's naughty take on Juventus draw with Belarusian champions Bate Borisov in the Champions League in 2008. And of course, Juventus are known as the old lady. So
of course, that's very good. Oh no, I'm really annoyed that I chose that just because I love smutty humour rather than working out. Of course, Juventus, old lady, like doing crosswords, Bate Borisov. I just chose it because I wanted to hear you say it again, basically.
Right. We're closing it out now. Is there anything on this? I've lost track of what's
well, Jockey's got to get this. Jockey's got to get this to force the Thursday night replay.
Yeah. Okay. Closing out, Chucky. You've got Angry Royal pulls dick off.
Certain.
Oh, he's blazed it over the bar. It's a Merton. Nothing to do with Prince Harry's solitary pursuits. And also not a real headline relating to Paul Dickoff and Joe Royal's time at Man City. It's one that Mark made up, probably sitting at home one night on his own.
Well done, Mark.
Yeah, well done, Kevin. 3-2. Unfortunately, there's no trophy. Just a sweet sense of revenge. 33 years later.
Oh, I'm straight down a tattoo parlour now without me.
Montclair's mailbag. Montclair's mailbag. Montclair's mailbag.
Yes, it's mailbag time once again. So, Matthew, please delve deep for some questions for Brian and Kevin.
Okay, I'm looking at these. We've already mentioned the Cantona kick at Selhurst Park, but Chris Etchingham asks, were you there, Kevin, and what were people's initial reaction to the event around you?
It's still quite a sensitive issue for Palace fans, this one, considering what went on to happen the semi-final afterwards, when there was all sorts of trouble that resulted in a young man losing his life. Ironically, I was working in Manchester the night it happened, but I was at the next Palace home game. The initial reaction, I'd say, was anger, in that just 3 days later, Man United's PR machine and the national press were colluding to make us the villain of the piece. And somehow Cantona, and it's still, if I have to go to Brighton for any work purposes, I won't buy a drink in a pub or buy chips in case I'm giving money to somebody who supports Brighton, in the same way that I won't buy a certain continental beer now, because it seems strange to me that suddenly what he did, he kung fu kicked a teenager with, he wasn't to know this, with learning difficulties, and somehow it became about him. He became the hero of the piece, and we became somehow racist. We had 7 black players who started that game, and somehow the implication was that we were racist South Londoners who needed teaching a lesson, and the narrative of that story changed completely, and we were kind of felt baffled and helpless while it was unfolding around us, really. And yeah, I've always argued that if a football fan came on the pitch and did that to a player, he wouldn't see the inside of a football ground again. So, he served his ban, rightly so, but it's still a sensitive issue to us. And also, I think it's too important. It annoys me when you'll still watch hilarious bloopers from football, and that will turn up, with Richard Key saying the word tits by mistake. And number 4 is Eric Cantona assaulting of it. It's still, for me, it's become a kind of, it's shown on TV now in the same way that Little Britain sketch is shown on TV, and in the same way that I'd rather not watch a Little Britain sketch on TV anymore. I'd rather not see that incident presented as it is in a kind of light-hearted manner now. So it is a sensitive situation for Palace fans. It really is, and we view it very differently to how the rest of the world view it, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there was an element of spin. You could say, like you say, I was there that night, and you obviously were, Brian, and I don't think we would have thought 10 years later that people would be sort of having a chuckle about it and saying that Eric was.
I agree totally with what Kevin said. It's nothing's funny about that, because the only thing that's humorous about that is the story that happened in the dressing room afterwards. But the whole thing about it, from the tackle, we accept in situations, particularly in competitive sport, you go into the red zone and you're completely out of control. And Eric, you knew that Eric was out of control, and that just around about that moment, had been getting some tight marking from Richard Shaw in particular, and he decided to take out his own retribution on Richard Shaw, and it was a bad tackle on Richard, and right for the referee, quite rightly, he gets a straight red card. Now, I say now that Richard was actually probably a bit fortuitous in the sense that Cantona never wore any metal studs. He always wore soft, hard ground shoes. So otherwise he could have given a lot more damage, really. And he got sent off, and I didn't actually see the incident live, because you're right away. You're thinking, some way that potentially we're going to get blamed for him getting sent off, right? So we're going to get the tirade from Alex Ferguson at the end of the game if we don't produce something in this game. And the game finishes 1-0. And when the goalkeeper comes on, the substitute goalkeeper, Gary Walsh, comes on and says that Eric's kung fu the guy in the crowd. I said, no, you won't believe this. He says, no, I don't believe you. I says, look, because I did physics at university, and I know about the laws of Newton's laws, and you can't, because that it's down below. There's no way that he can come through somebody in the crowd and be back on the track by the time I've turned my head. I know I'm not the quickest player, but my head turns quite quickly, and he's back on. And I said, I can't see how that can happen. He said, I'm telling you, he's done it. He's done this, and it wasn't until I got home, and it's recorded for me, and by the time you get home, it's very late, and you're watching this over and over and over, and you're going, fucking hell, what is he doing? What's going to happen? And all of the things that I mean, I wasn't surprised that when he first went to Croydon Crown Court, he actually got a custodial sentence for it. He took him down straight from the dock downstairs and away in the van. And that really didn't surprise me, because as much as you could be irritated from supporters, sometimes your own supporters as well, you just have to accept that when it comes down to it, they would rather be where you are, and you've got to behave in a certain way, and it never occurred to you to do anything, irrespective of what because that's what was part of what you got, whether it was in English or French or whatever. And I know that if it had been anybody else, if I'd have done it, I'd have been down the road. I'd never have played for Manchester United again. I knew that was so it was a difficult one to accept, that players get treated. Oh, some players get treated differently for different reasons. I found that difficult. But I don't see why anybody could say it was at all any humour in that at all, because there's nothing funny about it, you know. And then Eric's, I know that Eric's ashamed of it, you know. He's I heard him a couple of years ago on the radio, and somebody asked him about it. They said he was ashamed of it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've got to move on. The next one is Ivan Ralph asks you, Brian, have you seen the Slow Readers Club yet? If not, why not?
Yeah, I did. I think they played Neighbourhood in Warrington in the summer, yeah.
Okay. Short and sweet. Steve D asks, you, Kevin, one of your early successes on stage was I Was a Teenage Racist.
Yeah.
The show you did. How do you think that will go down with audiences in 2023 versus 1993?
It's amazing how often I get reminded of that show. Mine was one of the first, what they call narrative Edinburgh show. I wanted to, at the age of 17, I fell for the late 70s rhetoric that there were 2 million people unemployed, and there were 2 million Commonwealth immigrants. The irony, the reason I did the show is the irony was that my best friend who I grew up with, my next door neighbour, was Anglo-Caribbean, Richard, who thought it was hilarious. He used to come to National Front meetings with me and just sit at the back laughing. Richard was killed in custody in Ashford Remand Centre. He was wrongfully accused of shoplifting. He's still the only person in the world whose cause of death on the certificate was schizophrenia. Within months of Richard dying, I was a member of the Socialist Workers' Party because the scales fell from my eyes in a very big way. And 2 kids that I used to go to school with basically sat me down and explained to me why I was wrong to believe the things I did at the time. I was 17 and I'm 61 now. In a way, I've spent my whole life apologising for that. But the reason I was a teenage racist, and my agent at the time begged me not to do it because she said, you'll be the racist forever and people will come up to you forever asking you to justify it, or they will ask you to go on Talk TV and talk about your past, which I own up to my past. It was a short time in my past and I still regret it now and I'm still atoning for it in a way. I don't think to answer the question, and it's a good question, I don't think it would be possible to do that show now. When I did it in 1993, there was an enormous amount of goodwill from audiences because they knew the person I'd become. And I think the quality of debate and discourse now has changed so much. I think there are many venues who wouldn't allow me to do that show with that title, no matter how much I explained what the purpose of the show was. And it was a funny show, I have to say, even though it dealt with those very serious issues. I think there are many venues that wouldn't allow me to do it. I think there would be many audiences who wouldn't turn up to see it, but people understood then why I wanted to do it, why it was important for me to try and put it behind me. But I don't think I could do it. I don't think I'd be able to do it now, full stop, to be perfectly honest. At that time, I could. And at the time, I got a lot of stick for it from people. But I say that people understood it. The reviews were good, but there were people who came on. The very last night I did it in Liverpool, this chap was a social worker, asked if he could bring along a group of Afro-Caribbean mixed-race teenagers to see the show. And the Q&A afterwards was one of the most grueling hours of my life because they weren't going to let me off the hook by saying there were a lot of people who had those views in those days, blah, blah, blah. In a way, that final show, that final Q&A was the most cathartic bit because I had to properly confront what I'd gone through because they weren't letting me off. They weren't nice white middle class liberals who were going, okay, he's done the wrong thing. Now he's got a show out of it. They were like, no, why are you doing it? Why? How do we know you're not still like that? How can you promise to see those views won't come back? And you can say what you want. They haven't. They won't. I am ashamed of that period of my life, but I can't keep apologising for it, basically. But it's a very good question, actually, because I hadn't thought about that issue in that context. Actually, that's it's a very good question.
Yeah, fair enough. And the last one is our old mate Cumbrian Dave. A bit of a change of gear, this one. Here he is.
Question for Kevin. Who's the funniest person you've ever met?
Do you know what? Like most comics will always say they've got a mate. It's like my mate Gaz. It's probably the funniest person I've ever met.
Can I just stop you there? Is that your mate Gaz, who's called after Gary Shaw?
That's the one.
Brian, he doesn't leave any stone unturned when it comes to his research.
That's him. He's the most terrifying looking man, but the most kind. He's lovely, but he's very, very funny. But if you put him on stage, he would just stand there like a goldfish. He wouldn't know what to do. It's really odd because a lot of comics, we're only funny when other people. It's like I did a gig recently at the Comedy Store with Sean Walsh and Ramesh Ranganathan, who were mates of mine. And before the gig and during the interval, you're just chatting about Strictly Come Dancing, about history, about football. And then when somebody from the charity comes in with a couple of people who just want to say hello, you immediately start alpha mailing it, and you want to make the strangers laugh. Like comics don't try and make each other laugh, but I enjoy the company of comics, but as soon as what my wife calls a muggle comes into the room, immediately you just start fighting for attention. And as soon as the muggle leaves, you go back to talking about Strictly or Football. I think the person I'm most pleased that I met, and probably the funniest comic, Dave Allen was the funniest. I think the funniest person, the funniest professional comic. When Dave Allen did the series on ITV, he reluctantly came out of retirement to do the series on ITV. He didn't want to do it because he didn't like corporate television. He didn't like being told that he couldn't do stuff about cars in case there was a car advert on in a commercial break, for example. But also what Dave didn't want is that the producers at ITV said, you need to get a couple of younger people to join in and write some stuff for you. So he had the same agent as me and Mark Thomas. So they arranged for me and Mark Thomas to meet Dave. And Dave was one of those people, if Dave didn't like you, you knew Dave didn't like you. But if he did like you, he was brilliant. He was the most polite. Him and my mum got on fantastic. My mum, the first time she met him, because we started writing for Dave for this show, and it turned out that all we could do to aid the writing process is making the best cup of tea he ever had, because there's nothing we could do to help. He came in one morning. He said, I've been working on this routine about teaching my kid the time, and both Mark and I were like, oh, come on, Grandad, we've got governments to bring down. We can't be doing routines about teaching you. It's the funniest 15 minutes of stand-up. It's just genius 15 minutes. And my mum, good Catholic woman that she was, my dad was English, so Anglo-Irish relationship was in a whole nother podcast. My dad loved Dave Allen. My mum, who was the sort of Catholic who wouldn't go to church that often, but would kiss a bishop's ring at any opportunity. I know that sounds weird, but she was horrified that I was working with Dave Allen. So I arranged for Mum and Dad to come see one of the shows, and the whole time she was like, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. He won't. And I told Dave this was going to happen. And within 5 minutes, they were best mates. Within 2 hours, we had to send a search party out as they fucked off to a pub down the road. They're both getting really pissed. But he was the most charming. For me, he's the funniest. He's the funniest person I've ever worked with. He was just instinctive with him as well, but not just automatic. Because sometimes it gets a bit wearing if you're with comics or you're with people who are always trying to be funny. With Dave, it was restrained. It's like if you could have a perfectly normal conversation with him, and then somebody would say something, and he would just find an angle, just find a way. And also, as well, he was properly left wing. He was like properly. He had no time for what he called leprechaun Irishness. He couldn't be dealing with all the whimsy and he hated nationalism. He hated the fact that people on the island were fighting each other. But he also particularly. He would have been so unhappy now with this government. He would have got a brilliant hour routine out of it. But I think to answer the question, I think Dave Allen would be the answer to that question.
I think anyone disagreeing with that?
Yep, that's time, gentlemen. Please, let's wrap things up here. And firstly, thank our fantastic guest, Kevin Day. We hope you've enjoyed being with us, Kevin.
Mate, it's been such a pleasure. I hope I wasn't too serious. It was
brilliant.
It was such a privilege to be asked. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great. And you mentioned a book earlier. Tell us about the book you've got out or anything else that you've got coming out that's of interest to the listeners.
It's the book of the podcast. It's called Unfit and Improper Persons. It's an idiot's guide to running a football club. It's a way of trying to make football finance accessible. So basically, we've invented this Sunday league team called West Park Rovers that we take to European football. We examine the finances of football at every level across the way for women as well as men, and it's funny and informative as well. And it's nearly Christmas, so it's perfect stocking filler for those people in your life who you're struggling to buy presents for.
Yeah, I can thoroughly recommend it as well.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
Brian, Matthew, big thanks to you as ever.
Oh,
thank you.
Pleasure, and thanks, Kevin.
Thanks,
keep
Kevin.
up the great work.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you all. Take care now.
And finally, a huge thanks to you for listening. It's been a pleasure having you along. Subscribe to Life with Brian wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Brian McClare Pod. And please also follow the Sports Social Podcast Network, for which we are just one small cog in their mighty machine. So take care of yourselves, and we'll hope to be back with you again soon. Cheers.
Life with Brian. Life with Brian. Talking films or music. Life with Brian. Talking TV and food. Life with Brian. Talking trivia and exercise. Life with Brian. It's different every episode. Life with Brian. Talking politics and football. Life with Brian. It's different every episode. Life with Brian. Life with Brian.